Hello everyone, and welcome back to another Strategoi video. This time we're going to be taking a look at the changes for the endless spells in the most recent General's Handbook for 2022 to 23 Season 1. There are 17 different generic endless spells to be covering here, so I'm going to try to go fast. There's a lot of content and I could talk about these forever, but let's see if we can keep this within a reasonable length. But before we do that, don't forget to join our Discord, like, subscribe, comment. We're going to love talking about your feedback here. So please keep an active community going here. We love the feedback and love trying to correct any mistakes we might make in the video. Hopefully I won't make too many, but let's go ahead and jump on in. So we're going to be doing a general overview of the changes, the Warscrolls on a Warscroll by Warscroll basis, and then some popular picks. So, in this overview, we'll cover some average stats, the points themselves, and the types of endless spells that we're working with. So, the average points cost now is just shy of 50 points for each of the endless spells. This went down overall by about 17%. Which is good. GW is really trying to encourage us to use more of these endless spells that many of us have bought all of. The setup range, which should be differentiated between the effect range and the movement characteristic of predatory endless spells, has now actually been increased from 6 to 8 for 7 of our spells here, or plus 2 inches here, which is great to mean that we can project these spells a little bit further. And the average casting value is just shy of 6. There are a few outliers here, but for the most part, these are within reason for most casters. Though we don't have the shifts up and down of the points, these are the current points values that the spells are at, and we've sorted them. So you can see that we only have 120, 130, a whole bunch of 40s, some 50s and 60s, and then 70, 80 is only for 3 of our spells here. So the bridge is still real expensive. The Purple Sun is expensive both in terms of casting value and its points. And Spell Portal is still pretty expensive. But Burning Head stayed cheap. And we'll talk about some of the other changes in a bit. And then the way I see it, there are 4 different types of endless spells and why you would use them. Now, technically some of them bleed into the other categories here. But we've got direct damage, which would be causing some amount of mortal wounds, or occasionally just slaying a model outright, like in the case of the Purple Sun. We have got debuffs to enemy units, or to yourself, I suppose, but preferably to enemy units. We've got buffs, like to casting or to healing, basically is what we're looking at here. And then we've got movement buffs, which is, I guess, a particular type of buff. And you'll notice that Cogs gets to fit in 2 of these categories. Technically, there's some other spells that could have been included in direct damage, like Geminids could be included there, but they're so minimal at the amount of mortal wounds they do that it's not really the point of the spell. Alright, so for each Warscroll, we'll be covering its abilities, some changes, and the average effects. But to keep time down, I'm just going to summarize what it does and not read the whole thing letter by letter. Alright. Going in alphabetical order, we've got the Either Void Pendulum. This is the one that moves straight in a line, and anything that it hits does mortal wounds on the 2 up. The trick here with this guy is it used to be great because back in the day, before 3rd edition changes to how endless spells worked, your predatory endless spells could be controlled by your opponent. So the fact that it had to move in one line meant that you could not have to worry so much about it hitting your guys. That said, now, even though you probably still have control over it as long as your controlling wizard doesn't die, most likely your opponent will just move out of the way, I guess, knowing that they'll never get control over it. But anyway, it does an average of 1.67 mortal wounds per unit that it touches or comes across. The points went down, so that's good. The average damage didn't change. We just list that here so you can see it, since it's not directly computed in the Warscroll text itself. And like 6 other endless spells here, its setup range went from 6 inches to 8 inches. So those are always wholly within, but we got 2 extra inches to work with. Okay, Burning Head, the cheap spell. It's the one that does a certain number of mortal wounds and then disappears. It does the same amount of mortal wounds per unit as the Ether Void Pendulum. Its casting value went down by 1, so that's good. Setup range went up, that's great. Effect range, meaning after it finishes that move, any units within not 1 inches now, but 3 inches now get hit by this. That's fantastic. It's basically in combat with your units in, kind of principle. And it's only removed if it actually causes any mortals. We'll have to see if this means caused some mortals, meaning only you rolled a 2 up and then it counts as causing, or if they get negated. It doesn't specifically say negated, so most likely I'm thinking if you roll a 1, then it stays in play. Otherwise, and that's a new change. It used to just get removed anyway. Moving on. Cogs. Cogs has changed a good bit. It went down 5 points. And instead, as you're probably aware, it has 2 modes. We've got increasing the flow or decreasing the flow. Increasing the flow used to give us bonuses to charge in terms of inches. Now it's changed into re-rolling charges, and its bubble got a lot smaller. It used to be within 18 inches, now 12. So that's definitely a nerf, but the re-rolling of charges is a nerf only if you already have a re-roll to charge, because obviously they don't stack on top of themselves. But if you don't have that, this is better. As far as the decreasing flow, I think we could say this is generally a buff. It used to only impact 1 wizard, now it impacts all wholly within 12 instead of just within 6. So the range increased, but now it's a wholly within, so it's a tighter range, but not tighter compared to 6 in general, unless your base is huge. So the big pie plate. And re-rolling casting rolls is makes your wizards more consistent, but it used to give you one wizard plus 1 spell to cast, which was great for certain builds. This is probably better for your castle builds for wizards, though, in general. Obviously, it's redundant on someone that has Master of Magic as a command trait or any other effect that gives you re-rolling casting rolls. Okay, Life Swarm. It's the one that heals and can bring back slain models of D3 or less worth of wounds characteristic. Here's the problem, though, is it no longer triggers on setup, meaning it used to trigger as soon as you put it on the board, and then also at the end of the hero phase after it moved. Now, while its effect range, meaning which unit it can target, has gone up from 1 inch to 3 inches, which is great, effectively making its predatory range 2 inches more in a sense. The problem now is you're not getting that double tap on the turn you set it down. I personally don't find this to be such a big problem, because effectively in a lot of games, unless you were strategically are dispelling it in your opponent's turn in between your own turns, you weren't getting to, and then successfully cast it in the following magic phase of your own magic phase, you weren't getting to see it really do what it wants to do all that much, getting that double tap. So I don't think this is that much worse, but it does make a difference. It means at least 1 less heal that you're getting per game, if not a few more. All right, moving on. So Geminids. These guys used to work differently in 2nd edition, way differently, where each orb did something different. The rules for this haven't changed in this update, except for the points getting 50% cheaper, which is great, and the setup range getting 1 inch smaller. But I think it might be good to clear up a misconception here. When we read the text here, after doing maybe a mortal wound to a unit, what it's going to also do is make it so that it can't issue or receive commands until the start of the next combat phase. Now, unless they mean next in the casual sense, as in not this one, but the following one, as in next turn, not this one, which they probably don't, what this means is it's shutting down command point usage in between the end of the hero phase, which is this one, so it means it's not shutting down rallies or anything else that happens in the hero phase. It is shutting down for these units that took a wound, and they have to not have negated that wound as well. It's shutting it down in the movement phase, so no redeploys, no at the doubles for the auto runs, where it's shutting down shooting phase, all-out attacks or all-out defense, and it's shooting down charge phase, reroll charges, and unleash hells. but it's not shutting down Battle Shock. That's what the Horror Gas is for. And it's not shutting down Combat Phase, All-Out Attack, All-Out Defense, or any other Combat Phase abilities. So it's worth keeping in mind there that that's what this is doing. It's not until you're falling Hero Phase, which is what we're used to seeing. It's very specific. But that's not a change, that's just how it works. Okay, Horror Ghast. As I just said, this is shutting down Battle Shock in essentially Inspiring Presence command abilities. So what's changed? It got cheaper. The casting value got cheaper. Both of these are great. And it's no longer wholly within anymore. So all units within 12 inches of this guy in that Battle Shock phase are going to end up not being able to receive Inspiring Presence. This is particularly great if you're running something like a shooting build. You throw this up there, you knock out a few of their units, enough of their units to make them have a bad Battle Shock, and then they can't do Inspiring Presence, so hopefully their bravery is bad. If they do fail, then you add D3 to the number of models they flee. So it's strong, best combined with something like maybe in Soul Blight or any other army that can do a bravery bomb and lower someone's bravery as well. Okay, Lock-On is or Losh-On if you want, is the Bringy Dingy, the teleport for wizards now. They do end up suffering a mortal wound, and they have to be wholly within 3 inches before and after this thing moves. The trick here, of course, the move here is that certain bases just don't fit within 3 inches. I would say this is actually better on not normal wizards, but like a fighty character, or fighty wizard, I suppose, that's been given an arcane tome, so they can use this thing. And then now the change has been made that you can, in fact, move or run after the teleport. Unless this is a typo, GW usually doesn't say can for these types of scenarios because it is the default setting, but maybe they're just trying to make it extra clear that this has changed. But you can now move or run after this teleport, which means even though you had to be 9 inches away, now you can move 5 or whatever inches and make that charge really likely. More or less guaranteeing a charge if you want it, short of their redeploy. And yeah, that's pretty good. What it's not doing is getting your wizard closer to make the spell that turn, because this happens at the end of the hero phase after all of your spell attempts would have had to have been made. So unless you're getting a double turn or their units don't move away next turn, you might not have solved your range issue from some particularly short-range spell. But the points did go down on this guy, so that's good. Malevolent Maelstrom used to be the cheap spell, now is cheaper than it was. It was 65 points, has gone down 50. Its setup range has gone up 2 inches like a number of others. It's the one that as models die within 12 inches of it, it accrues points, essentially souls that get absorbed into that orb. Up to a max of 6, it starts with 1. And as spells are successfully cast around it and not unbound, it goes up as well. The thing about it, though, is it can't explode until it's gained at least 3 points of these things, which means at least 2 models have to have died or 2 spells or a combination thereof. And then it's a 1 out of 6 chance it explodes. The best it can get is a 4 out of 6 chance when you've got full souls stored in it. But it does do a lot of mortal wounds. So I would think with maybe a shooting build here, you throw this up, make a few units die, get it up to whatever amount you want it to be, and get it near their castle, and then at the end of the combat phase it goes off, and maybe you can really hit a bunch of guys. 12 inches is a huge bubble. 12 inches is the length across the diameter of an objective. So that's basically 2 objectives set on either side of it, or all around it. The whole objective marker, not at the center of the objective marker. Pretty strong. Okay. Prismatic Palisade. This guy got a buff, but not quite. Its range, setup range increased by 2 inches, and you're going to need that. It no longer blocks visibility for like the hero that you're setting up behind it, which was good unless they could, I don't know, translocate long strikes so they are now not blocked by this thing. Or you just walk a unit around so that they can now see the guy. Or with, what's it called? Sentinels, visibility wasn't an issue anyway, so this didn't really help a whole lot. So they tried to fix this. It made it so that any unit that's within 6 inches of it can't make a shot at all, and that's the unit, not models. So it can turn it off pretty easily, and the effect bubble grows 3 inches each battle round. That said, if it gets dispelled and then resummoned, it starts over again at 6. So the max size it can be is 18 inches. But let's keep in mind that it only has a setup range of 8 inches wholly within, which means unless your wizard is getting way up in the business of some shooting army, it's not going to do what you think it's going to do. I think in principle it's good. I think in practice it's going to have a really hard time doing what it wants. Daughters of Cain have a way to double the setup range of an endless spell, so you can maybe put it at 16 inches out. That's great, but still not probably what you need if you're trying to set it up early on in the game, short of teleporting. So, good try, GW. I think we're going to have to wait and see if this actually ends up making a difference. But I do like the change. Purple Sun of Shyism. Setup range has increased 2 inches, and a whole bunch of other things have changed. It no longer can go wild. It was the one endless spell that had the chance of going out of control, basically not controlled by your wizard anymore. It was on a dice roll, I believe. Also, what it does is quite different. It no longer hits units it passed over and within 1 inch, but instead all units within 3 inches, so that's better. Except unless along its course of movement you were able to tag a whole bunch of units, and now it's not within the 3 inches of them, so it's kind of a side grade. It no longer does 0, D3, or D6 mortal wounds, but now has a permanent -1 to save debuff, which is fantastic, and potentially kills a model in a unit. So on a roll of a 1, a model from that unit is slain. And we have a typo on the slide here. Roll dice for each unit within 2 inches of this endless spell. It's supposed to be 3, and I'm going to double check that real quick here to make sure I got that right. Yes, it's 3. So that's a typo on the description up above, but what we got down below is correct. So the trick with this guy is it's the highest casting value of 8+, which is hard for a lot of people to get off, but if you're the kind of army that has pluses to cast, I'm thinking Hallowheart, Tzeentch is going to be okay with this, some other things. This could be a real great monster or hero sniper, but also, meanwhile, affecting people's save rolls, which is great. Of course, it's going to affect your units too if you're up in the thick of it. The other advantage to having a high casting value is it means it has a high dispel value, because remember, you have to roll higher than that, so someone's going to have to roll a 9+ to get rid of this thing, which is pretty good. All right, Quicksilver Swords. Its average damage it's doing has gone up. It used to be roll 12 dice, and on 6 up it does mortal wound. Now it's on 5 up, which means it's doing 4 mortal wounds on average, and they cannot be negated by anything. Before it was just wards, but now bodyguard saves can't absorb it either. Or anything that negates something. Like I think Manfred has ignoring the first wound that's done to him per phase. This does not work on him. His ability does not work against this. The points went down by 33% from 90 to 60. That's great. So I actually think this spell has got some interesting use here, especially if someone has wards. Ravanax Gnashing Jaws, a little bit of a tongue twister. This one changed a good bit too, so let's go through them quickly. The points value went up 5, so a little bit of an increase there, but its setup range also went up to 8 inches. Its movement is 3d6 inches and can now be re-rolled. I think it was 3d6 before, but can be re-rolled now, which actually makes it a little more reliable. That said, there's some psychology on that. You're not always re-rolling because it's not a pass-fail. You're looking for as high of a roll as you can make, and anything above the expected value of 10.5, you might not want to re-roll, depending on how crucial it is that you get your Hail Mary off with what its effect now does. Let's go into that. So the eligible units are now also 1 inches after the move, but instead of triggering automatically, triggers on a 2+. It's going to be best against low movement units, and that's because the way it works is you take the difference between what you rolled for its movement, and remember you can re-roll that, and the target unit's movement characteristic. So as I computed here, on the average damage it's doing against a movement that has movement characteristic 5 went up from 1.75 before to 5.50 now. That's because the expected value of 3d6 without the rerolls, keep in mind, is a 10.5. I didn't compute that into this average here because of its psychological kind of underpinnings, which we can talk about in a Math Hammer video. And then also, that's minusing a move characteristic of 5, but it only goes off on a 2 up, so that means multiplying by 5 over 6. That's how we got that. Its max potential damage, though, used to be 3, and now it's 15. Now, remember, the chances we're actually going to roll 3 6s on this, and that's, and of course, it would have to be against a movement characteristic of 3 inch, like I'm thinking artillery pieces, for that to ever be 15. But it can swing quite a bit. People are definitely excited about this guy. All right, Shards of Valigar. This one is the one that kind of ties units up. It's gone down 20 points, and any unit that gets crossed by the 2 points closest on the 2 bases, which is tricky. You got to be careful about it. It's not just any units between it. It's got to cover the exact closest point, are ensnared, which means it has their movement characteristic. They cannot fly, and now they can no longer teleport, which is great against certain builds. So this has its strategies. I actually prefer Soul Snare Shackles, I believe, but using both of these would be a super control type of move that, you know, some armies might want to use, especially particularly defensive or ranged armies. Soulscream Bridge. This one went up 10 points, and its setup range has increased from wholly within 18 inches for both pieces to wholly within 24, which is great. This is still an amazing teleport effect. Granted, it has to be wholly within 6 inches before you make the move, and wholly within 6 inches when you land on the other end of it. But you can't make a normal run or a normal move or run in that same phase. This is obviously great for units like Iron Drakes that are better if they didn't make a move in a given turn, because it doesn't count as a normal move. And now that the range is huge, some people might use these 2 pieces just to block people from moving, because you can't cross endless spells unless you can fly, and you have to be able to land wholly on the other side of it. And this is on a giant chariot base. We were just speaking about Soul Snare Shackles. They went down 15 points, but their setup range also went down by an even greater percentage, by 33%. It can do some damage. On a 6-up, it does D3 mortal wounds, so you're talking about a third of a mortal wound per unit that it impacts. That's not really why you take it. What you're really doing is you are making it so they cannot run or attempt to charge. Amazing. It basically means those units, if you don't want to get charged, are going to have to get around you, especially if they can't fly. And if you set up the bases correctly, you can effectively block them out from doing landing in between the spell and your precious unit you're trying to protect. Okay, Suffocating Gravetide went down 10 points, and its setup range went up 2. This is particularly good against Horde units in a Horde meta. If someone's bringing those 60 zombies, then this is going to be doing 10 mortal wounds. And all it has to do is, it does this for each unit that it passed across, moving 8 inches as it does. I'm thinking with like a Lord Arcanum on foot who can add 6 inches to the movement characteristic of predatory endless spells, then you're making this 14 inches, and this thing's just flying all over units and tagging. It just has to tag the edge of them. It's not per model. So it could do some good damage. Umbral Spell Portal, still basically doing the same thing as before, where you can cast a spell through it, but you can no longer cast an endless spell through it, though predatory endless spells can in fact teleport through it. That said, after it's done this, it does not count as having been moved, which means it doesn't trigger any of its abilities. So you're basically losing a turn with that predatory endless spell, but getting a free teleport to put it somewhere else on the board. So maybe that's cool, maybe not. This is basically still going to be used the way it always has been. And that does it for the individual Warscrolls. I've talked about most of these, but Jonas and I picked 6 that we thought were kind of the key ones here. Cogs is still amazing for its reroll, casting, and charges. It's good for pretty much all armies, especially magic armies. Spell Portal, still great for magic armies, especially with spells that have short range or have huge bubbles, but need to put those bubbles more centrally into someone's castle. Life Swarm. Healing is always good. Not all armies have it. Yes, it got a little bit of a nerf, but it's still great. I think you're still going to see all three of those pretty frequently. And then the bottom three are more of like niche picks. Horror Gast is great for knocking down the bravery, battle shock type stuff against hordes, especially some of these Galician veterans that are expert conquerors that are holding objectives with large numbers of bodies. Seeing them flee is going to be pretty good. Soulscream Bridge is going to be boosting certain units' efficiency. This has always been a popular pick for certain units, or just getting someone across to the other side of the board. And then Purple Sun has spiky results, particularly good at monster and hero slaying, and then its save buff or debuff is fantastic. And that about does it. Hopefully this wasn't too long for y'all. I hope you guys enjoyed it and find these comments valuable. I know there are other sources of this information you can find online, but hopefully we bring something else to the discussion. Again, please like, subscribe, share the video, join the Discord, comment below, all that good stuff. In the meantime, we'll be having some more Math Hammer and other GHB related material coming out soon, in addition to, of course, Jonas's regular Lumineth content, especially once his voice heals up a bit. So thanks again for following the channel. We love you guys and look forward to hearing from you. Until next time, Ryan out.